Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm so grateful that you've decided to spend some of your valuable time with me as I finally get back to talking about some board games. How exciting! So late in 2021, I made a video about the death of my board gaming hobby and how, because of my life circumstances, I hadn't been playing any board games anymore. Now, just around the time I was posting that, something highly unexpected happened, which is that I started playing some board games again. And that came about for a couple of reasons. First of all, I reconnected with one of my really good friends from the past who I used to do most of my board gaming with, and we had sort of drifted apart doing our own things and hadn't connected for quite some time, but we reconnected and have started playing games again every couple of weeks. In addition to that, particularly over the Christmas holidays, my two young sons sort of became reinterested in playing games again, partly because I got them a very exciting new game for Christmas. So as a result of those two things, at the end of last year, I guess in probably November, December, I started playing some board games again, and this video is going to be about the games I played at the end of last year and what I thought about them. So let's begin with the games that my friend and I started to play. And the first time we met, we played two games. The first one was a game called Nagaraja that was designed by Bruno Cathala and Théo Rivière. This is a game that's a little hard to describe because it's really kind of a unique little, specifically two-player game, as you might expect from Bruno Cathala. This is quite a simple-to-learn, quick-to-play, two-player game that is very highly tactical and interesting. Each player is basically exploring their own temple, trying to find the most valuable artifacts without getting three cursed artifacts face up at the same time, because that will automatically result in you losing the game. However, the cursed artifacts, if you get one or two of them, are also worth the most points. So that's kind of an interesting little twist. But throughout the course of the game, instead of rolling dice, you're throwing these kind of rectangular fate sticks showing different symbols and pips on them, and you're using a hand of cards and trying to manage your cards in the best way possible to ultimately end up with the most points at the end of the game. I'm a big fan of Bruno Cathala's two-player games, and this was one that I rate 7 out of 10. It's quite a fun experience, not one of my favorites of all time, but one that I would gladly play anytime. The second game we played was a tiny little game called Quicks that was designed by Stefan Bendorf way back in 2012. And this is a little roll and write style game. If you've been following the board game hobby for the past couple of years, you'll know that these roll and write games have exploded in popularity. They're kind of all over the place, but this is one that, like I said, goes back about 10 years, long before this explosion of popularity came about. A roll and write game is essentially a Yahtzee style game where you roll dice, and depending on what you roll, you mark things off on a pad of paper and try to score the most points. And Quicks is a very fun example of this style game. It's very simple, very quick to play and straightforward, but it is entertaining and enjoyable, and I rate it a 6.5 out of 10. Nothing to particularly write home about, but something that is still enjoyable to play in sort of a filler context, maybe between a couple of more big and complex games. Now, the next time my friend and I got together, we played two more games again. The first one was Seven Wonders Duel, designed by Antoine Bauza and Bruno Cathala. This is specifically a two-player version of the game Seven Wonders, which is actually a game that I never really enjoyed very much. I'm not exactly sure what it was about it, but for whatever reason, it never really hit with me. However, this two-player game, which, much like its larger predecessor, is built around card drafting and taking turns choosing cards and adding them to your little civilization, It is a very interesting tug and war where there are a couple of ways where you might come up with an instant victory, either through military or through science, and if not, then you're adding points at the end of the game. But the way the two-player game is set up is very fun to play, and I own the Pantheon expansion, and we played with that as well, which I think adds some interesting elements to the base game as well. In particular, you're not forced to choose a card from the display. You can instead choose one of the gods in the Pantheon to activate. And so I enjoyed the expansion. I enjoyed the base game without the expansion. And overall, I rate the game a solid 8 out of 10. After that, we played another strictly two-player game called Patchwork, which was designed by Uwe Rosenberg. This is a really fantastic little simple two-player game about taking turns selecting these polyomino tiles of different shapes, adding them to your own board, trying to fill in your board as much as possible before the game ends. And it involves this interesting little currency system where you have to purchase the tiles in order to add them to your board. It's another very straightforward game, but it's a lot of fun, and I rate Patchwork 7 out of 10. The next time we got together, instead of playing two different games, we played one game twice, and that game was Super Motherlode. This one was designed by Gavin Brown and Matt Tolman, and it is a deck building game where you use your cards to dig down on this board that is kind of a mining situation where you go deeper and deeper into the earth and you excavate these gems of various values. You use the gems to buy more cards to add to your hand and to achieve certain goals. And at the end of the game, you're trying to end up with the most points. And the way that it combines the deck building with the digging in the board is just a ton of fun. It's a 2 to 4 player game, but it plays really well as just 2 players. In fact, the Board Game Geek website states that it's best with 2 players. And there's just a lot of really interesting stuff going on in quite a simple game. So I rate Super Motherlode a very good 8.5 out of 10. Now, I also purchased a big game for myself because I had a gift certificate to a local gaming store that had been given to me way back during my birthday in the springtime. And what I spent it on was a game called Clash of Cultures Monumental Edition. Now, I already own the original version of this game called Clash of Cultures, as well as its expansion called Civilizations. And in fact, I had done a little bit of work on the development and play testing of the expansion that was added to the base game. So that was an interesting experience too. And essentially Clash of Cultures is a big civilization game where you start with one little city and one little explorer, and you sort of go out, explore the world, build more cities, build armies, conquer other territories, gather resources and use them to build more things. You research technologies, and the technologies help you acquire things. And it's a big, long, complex game of civilization building, and is one of my favorite games of all time. So when I saw that they came out with this brand new Monumental Edition that tweaks the rules slightly and added some plastic miniatures to represent the wonders in the game, I thought, I think I'm going to pick up this game because I have the gift certificate, even though I have no idea if or when I'll ever get it played. I can sell my original version of the game in the expansion and then just hang on to this Monumental Edition, and maybe someday I'll get back to it again and build up a mighty civilization. The original Clash of Cultures with the expansion is a game that I rated 9.5 out of 10, and back when I had my list of my rankings of all of my games, it was number 7 out of all the games I've ever played, this 7th favorite game of all time. So definitely a big favorite for me. Before I go on and talk about a couple of really interesting games that I played with my kids, I just want to send out a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, in particular to my higher tier supporters, Joanna, Asmondas, Paul, and Mojo. No matter how many times I thank you, I feel like it's never enough. Just to have somebody support me in that way, to have people who've got my back, who are rooting for me to succeed on YouTube here, really, it means the world. Now, let's talk about the games that I played over the Christmas holidays with my kids. First of all, we had an old favorite come up. My older son, Evan, is a really big fan of an old game called Jäger und Sammler, which is German for hunters and gatherers. And it's a game by Rainer Knizia that was published in 2010. I'm pretty sure with this game, Rainer Knizia saw a little game called Hey, That's My Fish, and decided to turn it into a bigger game and add some more interesting elements to it. And Hey, That's My Fish has been one of my favorites for many, many years. And the fact that he came up with this sort of bigger, more interesting game with more things going on really appealed to me. Essentially, you have this huge board that's covered in things that your little hunters and gatherers can go and pick up. As you go around the board, picking up the pieces of the board, the amount of space you can travel gradually shrinks more and more until there's literally nowhere else to go. And then you switch to the winter. You repopulate the board and you do it again. You go around picking stuff up until there's nothing else to pick up. And then based on all the stuff you've picked up, you add up your points at the end of the game. And so on the one hand, you are trying to pick up the most valuable things off the board, while at the same time sort of blocking your opponents and kind of trying to hem them into small areas so that you can get the most stuff. And it's a very interesting, highly tactical game, and one that Evan requests, or at least used to request on a fairly regular basis when we were playing games more often. However, the big hit of our Christmas gaming was a game that I picked up for the boys that has just come out called The Adventures of Robin Hood by Michael Menzel. This is such a unique, interesting game. It's played on a board that is sort of like a Christmas advent calendar where you can sort of lift tabs on the board to see what's underneath it and then interact with those things you discover. And it's very much a free form movement where you can kind of you move all over the board and interact with what's available while trying to stay in the shade so that you are not captured by the guards. And it's also very much a storytelling game where it's played out over a series of adventures, and each adventure, as you interact with the elements of the board, you read passages from the storybook to see what happens. And these passages will typically give you 2 or 3 choices, as in a choose your own adventure game, and sort of determine what happens based on how you decide to interact with the things you discover. So it is such a unique game. Michael Menzel, in addition to being the designer, is also the artist who did all the art for the game, and he's just such an amazing artist. It's so well done. This was just the perfect family game. It's not a game that I would say you'd want to play with adults necessarily. It's very luck dependent. A lot of it really relies on just kind of randomly going around and seeing what you discover, and then again to resolve conflict or whatever, randomly drawing cubes from a bag and trying to draw white cubes. So there's a great deal of luck and randomness involved with the game. Not a ton of strategy necessarily, but just as a fun adventure storytelling experience, it was really fun to play with the kids. In fact, we played through the entire campaign of, I think it was 7 adventures. The interesting thing about it is you can go back and replay those adventures, and it's set up so that you can have an entirely different experience on the second playthrough too. So the replayability is very high for this game, even though there are just a limited number of scenarios included with the game. My kids are already wanting an expansion, however, to just keep playing more of the game. And it was the first time that we actually reached out and contacted a game designer, because one of my kids said to me, I wish we could just tell this designer how much we enjoy the game. And I said, well, actually, on BoardGameGeek.com, you can actually find the designer and send him a message. So we sent a message to this fellow in Germany, and the kids expressed how much they enjoyed playing as a game. And so that was kind of fun to interact in that way too. And The Adventures of Robin Hood, strictly as a family game to play with my kids, I rate 8 out of 10. As a game in general to play with other adult board game hobbyists, it wouldn't rank that high, but it really was a nearly perfect family game. I might at some point do an entire video dedicated to this game because it's so very interesting and unique. So let me know if that's something you would want to see, and maybe I'll take the time to do it at some point. So it was very fun to rediscover board gaming at the end of 2021 and to dive into some old favorites and a couple of new ones too. In looking at the list of games I just talked about, the only new to me games were Quicks and The Adventure of Robin Hood. The rest I had previously played. So I hope that I'll be able to continue month by month talking about the games that I've played in the previous month. So in February, hopefully I'll make a video talking about the games I played in January and so on. I hope this is something that will continue as the year progresses. And what about you? Have you played any fun games recently? Whether they were board games or video games, PC games? I'm just really curious to know if you've been playing anything, so please do let me know in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. Hey, it's Josh. You know why I'm here. Sometimes you just need that friendly reminder to give a little thumb up, to subscribe to the channel, to share the video with somebody who would enjoy it. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers. This is it. Card. So I had that kind of experience as part of it. Some figures, in particular to my higher tier supporters, Joanna, peek up under, try not as a game in general to play with other board game hobbyists.